He was just a kid when he aged out of the system, a college degree in one hand and an eviction notice in the other. All he inherited was a single key and a deed to a rusted metal shed in the middle of nowhere. But what he discovered inside that forgotten Quonset hut would unravel a lifetime of lies and set him on a path to reclaim not just a piece of land, but the truth about his entire family. If you've ever felt lost, like the world has forgotten you, stick around. This story is for you. And if it hits home, hit for people who've had to find their own way back. The key to my dorm room felt like a lead weight in my palm. It wasn't my key, not really. It belonged to the university, just like the room, the bed, and the last 4 years of my life had belonged to them. Before that, it was the state. I was a ward, a number, a box to be checked on a form. Now, at 22, with a degree in library science that suddenly felt like the punchline to a very long, very unfunny joke, I was about to be nothing. The resident advisor, a cheerful sophomore named Kevin, gave me a sympathetic wince. "Sorry, man. All residents have to be out by 5. It was 4:30. My worldly possessions were packed into 2 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag at my feet. The sum total of a life lived on scholarships and state aid. I slid the key into the lock one last time, turned it, and pushed the door open to prove it was empty. Kevin peered inside, his eyes scanning the bare mattress and the clean, empty desk. "Looks good, Leo. You, got a place to go?" The question hung in the stale, institutional air. It was the question I'd been avoiding for months. I gave him a tight, unconvincing smile. "Figuring it out. Got a few options." It was a lie, and we both knew it. My only option was the bus station downtown, and after that, the vague, terrifying expanse of the unknown. He nodded, not pushing. He was a good kid. He just had a job to do. I signed the checkout form, my hand feeling disconnected from my body. With that final stroke of the pen, my connection to the only home I'd known for 4 years was severed. The umbilical cord was cut. I was officially, properly, adrift. I dragged my boxes down the 3 flights of stairs, the sound echoing in the deserted hallway. The campus was a ghost town, emptied out for the summer. A week ago, it had been a hive of frantic energy, finals, parties, tearful goodbyes. I'd watched it all from a distance, a ghost at the feast. They were all going home, to parents, to summer jobs, to lives that were waiting for them. My life felt like it had just ended. I sat on the steps of the dorm, the concrete still warm from the afternoon sun, and pulled out my phone. The battery was at 12%. I had $43 in my bank account. Enough for a bus ticket to somewhere, but not a ticket to anywhere that mattered. My thumb hovered over the contacts icon. There was no one to call. My parents were a faded photograph, dead in a car crash when I was 5. My grandparents were gone too. My grandmother, years ago. My grandfather, a man I barely knew, had passed away 2 years into my college term. I'd gotten a letter from a lawyer, a brief, sterile notification. He'd left nothing, it said, or nothing to speak of. His affairs were a mess. I hadn't thought much of it. He was a ghost to me, a name on a birthday card with a crumpled $5 bill inside once a year until I was 10. Then, nothing. Just as I was about to power the phone off to save the battery, it buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some flicker of desperation made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Am I speaking with Leo Vance?" The voice on the other end was dry, professional. It sounded like old paper. This is he. Mr. Vance, my name is Arthur Davies. I'm the executor of your grandfather's estate. I know we corresponded briefly a couple of years ago, but a final matter has come to my attention that requires your immediate decision. I stood up, the cardboard boxes digging into my shins. My grandfather's estate? I thought that was settled. I thought there was nothing. I'm sorry, I said, confusion making my words slow. I was told there was nothing left. That is substantially correct, Mr. Davies said, with the careful precision of a man who builds by the minute. His debts exceeded his assets. However, there is one asset remaining that was legally protected from creditors. A piece of property. It is, to be blunt, of negligible value, but it is legally yours. He paused. There is also a standing offer to purchase it. It's not a significant sum, but given your circumstances, forgive me, I was informed by the university of your graduation and departure, it might be of interest to you. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Property. An offer. What kind of property? It's a 5-acre parcel in Garnett County, Montana. Rural. Undeveloped, save for a single structure. A Quonset hut, I believe. A Quonset hut. A rusted, half-cylinder metal shed. I'd seen pictures. They were used for storage, for barns, not for living. And the offer? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A development corporation, Trestle Holdings, has been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for some time. They are offering $5,000 for yours. The offer expires in 72 hours. After that, they will likely pursue foreclosure through the county for back taxes, which are, I must inform you, considerably overdue. $5,000. It felt like $1 million. It was a bus ticket and a security deposit. It was a month, maybe 2, of not being on the street. It was a lifeline. But I don't understand, I stammered. If it's mine, why haven't I heard about this before? Your grandfather's will was specific, Davies said, his voice softening just a fraction. Possession of the deed was not to be transferred to you until your 22nd birthday, or upon your graduation from a 4-year university, whichever came later. You graduated 3 days ago. The trust has just released the paperwork to my office. A cold knot formed in my stomach. He had planned this, waited for me to be completely, utterly alone before this, what? This choice? This test? So I can take the money? I asked. Yes, I can wire it to your account upon receipt of a signed release. Or, he said, and the word hung there, heavy with implication. You can refuse the offer and take possession of the property yourself, in which case you would be responsible for the $3,000 in back taxes. The choice was obvious, insane even. Take the $5,000, which after taxes would leave me with $2,000 and a clean break. Or take on a piece of worthless land and a $3,000 debt I could never pay. It was no choice at all, but a strange, stubborn seed of defiance began to sprout in the barren soil of my despair. This was the only thing he had left me, the only thing in my entire life that was mine. A rusted metal shed on 5 acres of forgotten dirt in Montana. It was a legacy of ruin, but it was a legacy nonetheless. Where do I get the key? I asked, the words tasting strange in my mouth. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Mr. Davies blinking. The key? To the Quonset hut, I clarified, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. I'm not selling. I don't know why I said it. It was the stupidest, most self-destructive decision I could have possibly made. But it was my decision. The first one I'd ever made that wasn't about just surviving until the next day. It was about claiming something. Mr. Davies sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Very well, Mr. Vance, as you wish. The deed and the key are in a safe deposit box at my firm. I will mail them to the general delivery address in Coldstream, Montana. It's the closest town. I wish you luck. He didn't sound convinced. I wasn't either. After he hung up, I stood there for a long time, phone in my hand, until the screen went black. Then I picked up my boxes and started walking toward the bus station. I had $43. The ticket to Coldstream, Montana was $39. The bus ride was a 3-day descent into a different world. I watched the manicured green of the East Coast bleed into the flat, orderly squares of the Midwest, and then shatter into the vast, raw, broken country of the West. The seats were sticky vinyl, the air thick with the smell of diesel and recirculated despair. I slept in fits, my head pressed against the vibrating window, dreaming of nothing. During the day, I watched the landscape unspool. The sheer scale of it was humbling. It made my own problems feel small, insignificant, which was both a comfort and a terror. If I disappeared out here, no one would notice. I would just be another ghost in a land of ghosts. I ate peanut butter crackers I'd bought with my last $4 and drank water from station fountains. By the time the bus wheezed into the dusty parking lot of a gas station with a sign that read, Coldstream, population 412, I was hollowed out, running on fumes. Coldstream wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one, a single main street with a handful of storefronts. A bar with a buzzing neon sign, a general store, a post office, and a boarded-up movie theater. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't empty silence. It was a living thing, thick with the hum of insects and the sigh of the wind blowing across the plains. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and indifferent. I walked to the post office, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the cardboard boxes left behind at the bus station. They were full of books I didn't need and clothes for a life I no longer had. A woman with a face like a wrinkled map and kind eyes sat behind the counter. "Help you?" she asked. "General delivery for Leo Vance," I said. She squinted at me, then her eyes softened with recognition. "Ah, you must be Frank's boy, grandson, I mean." My stomach clenched. Frank. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years. "You knew him?" "Everyone knew Frank," she said, turning to a wall of metal boxes. "Quiet man, kept to himself mostly. Sad what happened. Here you go." She handed me a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I took it. Inside was a folded, brittle document, the deed, and a single, heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key. The metal was cold against my skin. "The property's about 5 miles out of town," the woman said, leaning on the counter. "East, on the old quarry road. Can't miss it. Big, ugly tin can sitting in the middle of a field. You got a ride?" I shook my head. "Well," she sighed, "ain't much out there. No water, no power. Frank used to haul it in. You'd better stock up at the general store before you head out." I thanked her and walked across the street, the gravel crunching under my worn-out sneakers. The general store was a dim, cool cavern smelling of sawdust and coffee. I used my credit card for the first time, wincing as I bought a gallon of water, a box of crackers, a cheap flashlight, and a book of matches. The total came to $21. Debt. Another weight added to the pile. The man at the counter, a burly guy with a thick beard, grunted as he bagged my things. You the one heading out to the old Vance place? I nodded. He shook his head slowly. Tough spot. Wind blows right through that thing. You be careful. Critters get in there. The walk was long. The sun beat down, and the asphalt of the main road quickly gave way to a rutted dirt track. The sky was immense, a piercing blue dome that seemed to press down on the earth. There was nothing but rolling, golden-brown hills, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stubborn pine. After an hour of walking, I saw it, just as the postmistress had described, a big, ugly tin can. The Quonset hut sat alone in a field of weeds, its corrugated metal sides streaked with rust, the color of dried blood. It looked like a beached whale, something ancient and forgotten. It looked like the end of the world. As I got closer, the scale of the decay became clear. Windows were cracked and grimy. The large sliding door at the front was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on its track. A profound sense of desolation washed over me. This wasn't a home, it was a tomb. My inheritance was a pile of rust. I dropped my bag and pushed at the heavy door. It groaned in protest, scraping against the concrete floor, but opened enough for me to slip inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust, damp, and mouse droppings. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows and holes in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes. It was one enormous, cavernous room. The curved ceiling soared 20 feet above my head. A layer of dirt and debris covered the concrete floor. Against one wall was a rusted metal frame bed with a stained, bare mattress. Next to it, an overturned crate. In a corner, a pot-bellied stove stood cold and silent, a stack of firewood, now gray and petrified, beside it. That was it. No kitchen, no bathroom, just a vast, empty space. My grandfather had lived here. The thought was staggering. What kind of life had he led in this metal shell? I walked the perimeter, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It was bigger than any apartment I could ever afford, yet it felt smaller, more claustrophobic than my dorm room. The wind whistled through the gaps in the metal seams, a low, mournful sound. I felt a surge of bitter anger. This is what he left me? A ruin? A joke? I kicked at a loose pile of debris, sending a cloud of dust into the air. My foot struck something solid, a loose floorboard. Not a floorboard, but a square of plywood set into the concrete, slightly askew. Curiosity, the only emotion I had left that wasn't exhaustion or despair, took over. I knelt and pried at the edge with my fingers. It was heavy, but it lifted. Beneath it was a dark, square hole, and inside the hole, nestled in the dirt, was a military-style metal footlocker, secured with a heavy padlock. My breath caught in my throat. This was something. This was more than just an empty shed. I pulled it out. It was heavy, solid. I shook it, but only heard a faint, soft thud from within. The padlock was old and rusted, but thick. I had no tools, no way to open it. I looked around the hut, my eyes scanning the junk-strewn corners. My gaze landed on the pot-bellied stove. Next to it was a heavy iron poker, used for tending the fire. It was long and solid. It would have to do. I jammed the tip of the poker into the shackle of the lock and leaned on it with all my weight. The metal groaned. I twisted, my muscles screaming in protest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent hut, the rusted hasp of the lock snapped. The lid of the footlocker was stiff. I had to pry it open, the metal screeching in protest. The smell that wafted out was of old paper and cedar. My heart was pounding. Inside, resting on a bed of what looked like dried herbs, was a single, thick, sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. Leo. Just my name. Beneath the envelope was a small, ornate brass key, the kind for a diary or a small box. And under that, a stack of photographs tied with a string. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling. The paper was thick, creamy, and felt impossibly old. I broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, filled with that same cramped handwriting. I sat on the dusty floor, leaned my back against the cold metal wall, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come of age, and you have made a choice. You chose this place over the money. I hoped you would. It tells me there is still a part of me in you. A stubborn, foolish part, maybe, but a good one." I had to stop and take a breath. The words were a shock, a voice from the grave speaking directly to me. "I imagine you have a great many questions. I imagine you hate me. You have every right. I know what the world has told you, that I abandoned you, that I was a poor, broken man who couldn't even take care of his own grandson. It is what I needed the world to believe. It is the story I built, brick by brick, lie by lie, to keep you safe." Safe? From what? I read on, my eyes devouring the words. "Your parents did not die in an accident, Leo. They were murdered. They were good people who found out something terrible about a powerful man. A man who was poisoning the land and the water here for profit. They were going to expose him. They were silenced before they could. I was there. I was a witness, but they knew I was a witness. They came for me too. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to control me. They threatened you. They told me if I ever spoke a word of what I knew, if I ever tried to raise you myself, they would make sure you joined your parents." A cold dread, so profound it felt like ice water flooding my veins, washed over me. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. It was the rambling of a lonely old man. It had to be. But the words on the page were steady, certain. So I made a deal with the devil. I gave you up. I let the state take you, where I knew you would be a number, a file, anonymous and safe, far away from here. And I stayed. I played the part of a ruined man. I let my farm fail. I sold off everything, piece by piece, until all I had left was this worthless patch of dirt and this metal shed. I made myself invisible. And all the while, I watched. I gathered proof. The man who did this, his name is Marcus Thorne. He runs Trestle Holdings, the same company that I am sure has made you an offer for this land. He thinks it's just a final loose end. He doesn't know what's really here. The letter trembled in my hands. Trestle Holdings. The name from the lawyer's call. It was real. This was all real. I couldn't leave the evidence in a bank. I couldn't trust anyone. So I hid it. Here, in this place he thinks is worthless. This letter is only the beginning. The small brass key in this box opens another lock. Look to the north wall, the one that bears the brunt of the wind. Count 3 panels from the corner. Measure 5 feet up. There is a loose rivet. Behind it is the truth. Everything you need is there, Leo. Proof, documents, and money. All the money I saved my entire life, scrimping and saving in secret. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough. Enough for you to have a choice. You can take it all and disappear. Start a new life somewhere far away from here. No one would blame you. It is a safe choice. Or you can stay. You can use what you find to finish what your parents started, to bring the truth to light. It is a dangerous choice. It may cost you everything. I cannot make it for you. All I could do was get you here, to this moment. I have lived my life in shadow so that you could one day have the chance to live in the light. Whatever you choose, know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. I am sorry for the life you've had. I hope you can forgive me. Your grandfather, Frank. I let the letter fall into my lap. The silence in the Quonset hut was absolute. The world had tilted on its axis. My entire life, the story I had told myself about being an orphan, about being abandoned, was a lie. It wasn't a story of neglect. It was a story of protection. A brutal, heartbreaking, and deeply loving protection. The anger I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by a wave of grief so immense it buckled me over. I cried. I cried for the 5-year-old boy who lost his parents. I cried for the lonely kid in the group home who thought his grandfather didn't want him. I cried for the young man who had felt utterly alone in the world. And most of all, I cried for the old man who had lived out his days in this cold metal box, sacrificing everything, his reputation, his comfort, his relationship with his only family, to protect me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been standing guard. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours as the light outside began to fade, casting long shadows across the concrete. The grief slowly subsided, hardening into something else. A cold, quiet resolve. My grandfather had given me a choice: run or fight. For 22 years I had been running, or rather, I had been pushed along by systems and circumstances, never making a choice for myself. Survive. That was the only goal. But this was different. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my parents. It was about the grandfather I had never known, but who had loved me more than anyone. He hadn't left me a ruin. He had left me a weapon, a legacy, and a home. This ugly, rusted metal shed was the only true home I'd ever had. It was a fortress he had built for me, disguised as a scrap heap. I looked at the small brass key glinting in the fading light. There was never really a choice. Not for the man he hoped I would be. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, it probably means you've known what it's like to feel like the world has dealt you an impossible hand. Maybe you've had to uncover a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your own life. It's a lonely place to be. I want you to know you're filled with people who get it. So if this is hitting you, take a second. Hit below and just say hi. Let us know you're here. It matters. It really does. Now, let's get back to what I found behind that wall. My body ached as I pushed myself to my feet. My muscles were stiff from the walk and from sitting on the cold concrete. I took the flashlight I'd bought, its beam cutting a weak yellow circle in the growing darkness. The north wall, the one that bears the brunt of the wind. I walked over to it, the wall that faced the endless expanse of the plains. I could hear the wind moaning outside, a constant, low pressure against the metal. 3 panels from the corner. I counted them, my fingers tracing the cold, corrugated ridges. 5 feet up. I was just under 6 feet tall, so it was roughly at eye level. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the rows of round, rusted rivets. My fingers brushed over one that felt different. It was slightly raised, not flush with the metal like the others. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed it. Nothing. I tried to twist it. It wouldn't budge. It was rusted tight. I went back for the tire iron. No, the poker. The poker from the stove. I placed the tip against the edge of the rivet and tapped it gently with the heel of my hand. The rust flaked away. I tapped it again, harder this time. With a faint squeak, the rivet popped out and fell to the floor with a tiny metallic clink. Behind it was a small, dark hole, just big enough to fit a finger. I hesitated for a second, my mind flashing with images of spiders and nests. Then I pushed my index finger inside. I felt the edge of something smooth and rectangular, a metal plate. I hooked my finger behind it and pulled. A section of the corrugated panel, about a foot square, came away in my hand, attached to a hidden hinge at the bottom. It opened downwards, revealing a dark, insulated cavity within the wall. And inside that cavity was another metal box. This one was smaller, more like a deed box, and it had a small, ornate brass lock. The lock that matched the key from the footlocker. My hand was shaking so much I could barely fit the key into the lock. It clicked, the sound deafeningly loud in the silent hut. I lifted the lid. The contents were packed tightly. On top was a stack of rubber-banded cash. It was all 20s and 50s, old bills. I didn't count it, but it looked like thousands. More money than I had ever seen in my life. Beneath the cash were several manila folders, thick with documents. And under the folders was another letter, this one much shorter. "Leo," it said, "this is the truth. Don't trust the local law. Thorn owns them. The man you can trust is named Elias Vance, my brother, your great-uncle. I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. I had to cut him off too, to keep him safe, to keep the story believable. He thinks I'm a disgrace. Maybe he's right. But he's a good man, a lawyer in Helena, a damn good one. He never forgave me for what he thought I did to you. If you show him this, he'll help you. He'll know what to do. The money is for the fight. For him, for supplies, for whatever you need. Or it's for your escape. The choice is still yours, son. Be careful, be smart, and be brave. My great-uncle. I had other family, another lie, another layer of protection. My grandfather had isolated himself completely, burning every bridge to make his cover perfect. The weight of his sacrifice was crushing. I set the letter aside and pulled out the folders. My hands were numb. I opened the first one. It was filled with geological surveys, water sample reports from a lab in Bozeman, and highlighted maps. The reports were dense with chemical terms, but the conclusions were starkly summarized in my grandfather's neat handwriting in the margins. Arsenic, lead, mercury, all at levels far exceeding legal limits. The samples were taken from wells on properties all around his land. My grandfather had been methodically documenting the poisoning of his neighbor's water for years. The second folder contained financial records, copies of Shell Corporation registrations, bank transfers, and land purchase agreements, all linked to Trestle Holdings and, personally, to Marcus Thorn. It was a complex web of deceit designed to hide his ownership and liability. My grandfather had somehow obtained copies, painstakingly piecing together a conspiracy of corporate malfeasance. He wasn't just a farmer, he was an investigator. The third folder was the most chilling. It was a simple spiral notebook. Inside were dated entries, a journal of sorts. It detailed meetings, conversations he'd overheard, license plate numbers of trucks he'd seen dumping barrels into the old quarry at night. It was a meticulous record of Thorn's crimes. And then I got to the last entry. It was dated the week before my parents died. "Catherine and John came to see me today," it read. My mother and father. They brought the boy, Leo. He has his mother's eyes. They showed me their own research. They'd found the same things I had, but they had the fire of youth in them. They were going to go to the press, to the EPA. I begged them to be careful. I told them Thorne was a dangerous man. They wouldn't listen. They said they couldn't stand by and watch people get sick. They said it was their duty. God, they were so brave. Braver than me. The next entry was 2 weeks later. The handwriting was jagged, almost illegible. They're gone. A truck lost its brakes on the pass. That's the story. A lie. Thorne's man was in the bar last night, drunk and bragging about a job well done. I saw him. I heard him. They know I heard him. They came to see me this morning. They brought a picture of Leo. They made the deal clear. My silence for his life. My breath hitched. I closed the notebook, my knuckles white. This was it. The proof. The motive. The whole ugly, sordid story. My parents weren't just activists. They were heroes. And they had been executed for it. Marcus Thorne hadn't just bought some land. He had destroyed my entire family, my entire world, and built his fortune on top of their graves. And my grandfather had been forced to stand by and watch, a silent prisoner in his own life. His only act of defiance, this secret, patient war he waged from a rusted metal shed. The rage that filled me was cold and pure. It burned away the last of my fear, the last of my self-pity. The choice he had given me was no longer a choice between running and fighting. It was a choice between letting Thorne win or honoring the sacrifice of 3 people who had given everything for me. I looked around the Quonset hut. The dust, the rust, the cold. It was no longer a symbol of decay. It was a monument, a command center, a legacy of love and resistance passed down to me. I carefully packed the documents and the money back into the deed box. I put the box in my duffel bag, zipped it tight, and slung it over my shoulder. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight, the weight of purpose. I spent the night on the filthy mattress, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl against the metal walls, and I thought. I thought about the life I'd had, a life of quiet survival, of making myself small and invisible so as not to cause trouble. That life was over. The boy who walked into this hut this afternoon was gone. In his place was someone else. Frank's grandson. Catherine and John's son. I didn't know if I was brave or smart, like my grandfather had asked me to be. But I knew I had to try. The next morning, I walked back to town. The 5 miles felt shorter this time. The sun was on my back, and the air was crisp and clean. When I walked into the general store, the bearded man at the counter looked up, surprised. "Back so soon? Had enough of the quiet life?" "Just getting started," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Does the bus to Helena run from here?" He nodded. "Once a day. Leaves at noon." It was 10 o'clock. I had 2 hours. I bought a cup of coffee and a map of Montana. I sat at a small table in the corner and drank the coffee, letting the warmth seep into me. I looked at the map, tracing the road from Coldstream to Helena. It was a few hours away, a different world, a city with lawyers and newspapers and state officials. I pulled out the notebook and found the entry with my great-uncle's name. Elias Vance, attorney at law, Helena, Montana. I had a name. I had a destination. I had a mission. For the first time in my life, I had a plan that went further than the next meal or the next night's shelter. The bus pulled up at noon, the same wheezing, tired vehicle that had brought me here. But as I stepped on, I felt like a different person. I was no longer running from a life of nothing. I was running toward a life of purpose. As the bus pulled away from Coldstream, I looked out the window at the rolling hills. Somewhere out there was my Quonset hut, my home. I knew I would be back. This was just the beginning. The fight would be long and hard. A man like Marcus Thorne wouldn't go down easy. He had money, power, and a generation of secrets to protect. I had a box of documents, a bag of cash, and a story that no one had ever heard. It wasn't a fair fight, but my grandfather had spent 30 years balancing the scales. He'd given me a fighting chance. That was more than I'd ever had before. When I arrived in Helena, the city felt loud and overwhelming after the profound silence of the plains. I found a cheap motel for the night, paying in cash. I didn't want a paper trail. Not yet. I spent the evening in that sterile, anonymous room, spreading the contents of the box across the worn bedspread. I read every document again, every report, every journal entry. I organized them, memorized them. This was my inheritance. Not the land, not the money. The truth. The next morning, I found a payphone. My hands were sweating as I looked up the address for Elias Vance's law firm. It was a modest office in an older brick building downtown. I stood across the street for a long time, just watching. What if he didn't believe me? What if he hung up on me, or worse, called the police? My grandfather had said he was a good man, but 30 years of silence was a deep chasm to cross. Finally, I took a deep breath and walked across the street. The name on the door was simple: Elias Vance, attorney at law. I pushed it open. A bell chimed. A woman at a reception desk looked up. She was older, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Mr. Vance," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" I shook my head. "No, but please tell him it's about his brother, Frank." Her expression changed. The professional mask slipped, replaced by a flicker of curiosity and something else. Sadness? "And your name?" Leo Vance." Her eyes widened. She picked up the phone on her desk. "Elias," she said softly, "you need to come out here." A moment later, a door opened and a man emerged. He was tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and the same piercing blue eyes I'd seen in the one faded photograph I had of my grandfather. He looked at me, and his face was a storm of conflicting emotions: disbelief, anger, and a deep, ancient grief. "Frank's boy?" he whispered. I just nodded, unable to speak. I held out the short letter my grandfather had written to him. He took it, his hand shaking slightly, and read it. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "He wasn't a monster," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He was a hero." Elias Vance didn't say a word. He just walked around the desk, pulled me into a fierce, awkward hug, and for the second time in as many days, I stood in a room with a stranger who was my family and cried. The story I've shared with you isn't over. In many ways, that day in my great-uncle's office was the real beginning. The legal battle against Marcus Thorne and Trestle Holdings was brutal. It took years. There were threats, setbacks, and moments where I thought we would lose everything. But we didn't. We used my grandfather's evidence, his meticulous records, and Elias's brilliant legal mind. We brought the truth to light. Thorne lost everything. The families whose water he had poisoned received justice, and my parents' names were cleared. They weren't victims of a tragic accident. They were remembered as the heroes they were. I used the money my grandfather left me, not for an escape, but to fortify. I paid the back taxes on the land. I hired a local crew to help me fix up the Quonset hut. We patched the roof, installed new windows, and ran a line for power and water. We put in a small kitchen and a proper bathroom. It's not fancy, but it's solid. It's warm. It's mine. I live there now. In the quiet of the Montana plains, I can still feel him, my grandfather. His stubborn, loving spirit is in the walls of that place. His legacy isn't just in the legal victory. It's in the home he secretly preserved for me. It's in the second chance he gave me at a life and at a family. I learned that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. Home isn't a building. It's a place where you finally understand your own story. My story began with an eviction notice and a key to a pile of rust. But it led me here, to a life of purpose, to a family I thought I'd lost forever, and to a peace I never imagined was possible. So I want to ask you, what does the word home mean to you? Have you ever found it in a place you least expected? Every single one, and I believe our stories are how we find our way back to each other. If this meant people who know that sometimes the most broken places hold the most beautiful truths.